Before we can begin installing Server 2016 and all the machines in our infrastructure, we need to know what kind of resources they require. And that's going to be dictated by the workloads we put on these machines, what roles and features, applications, and services they're going to need to support. That's also going to help us determine what addition and installation option our machines are going to need. Let's jump in and take a closer look at how to plan for a Windows Server 2016 deployment. Breaking out a Word document or good old-fashioned pen and paper can really go a long way in helping you understand the requirements for each individual server that you're standing up in your infrastructure. Documenting these 4 questions will help you understand the kind of machine you're building, the resources it will require, and how you're going to manage it. First up, we have editions. There are 6 different flavors of Server 2016, the most popular being Standard and Data Center. We'll go over all 6 of them here shortly. We also have to think about roles and features and third-party applications, otherwise known as the workload. What is the meaning of life for this server? Is it going to be a web server, a database server, a domain controller, a remote access server, or is it going to be a combination of those in what's known as a multi-purpose server? Understanding those will also give you a great idea of what kind of edition you will need for that machine. Also, is this going to be a physical or virtual machine? That's going to greatly impact the kind of resources we need to feed it, as well as our disaster recovery plans. It's a lot easier to migrate a virtual machine to another physical host than it is to migrate a physical host to another physical host, which will also impact what edition we choose and the licensing costs. And finally, what installation option do we need? We have 3 of them now in Server 2016. We have the desktop experience, which is the full GUI. We have Server Core, which is a command line only lightweight version of the OS, and we have the brand new Nano Server, which is an extremely small, lightweight, and headless version of the OS. And your decision there will also depend on the workload that's running on these machines and how you plan on managing it down the road. Also, keep in the back of your mind the minimum requirements needed to run Server 2016. Most of these are pretty straightforward. I just want to point out here that 512 megabytes is the minimum for Server Core, 2 gigabytes is the minimum for the desktop experience, or the full GUI as we call that. And notice Nano Server isn't on here. We'll talk more about Nano Server. We've got nuggets dedicated to it, but it's usually not in the conversation with Server Core and full GUI initially, and that's because we don't install it like we do a standard server installation. We actually generate VHDs using PowerShell inside of an already installed operating system. So again, we'll talk more about that when we get to Nano Server, and we'll do a full comparison of all 3 of these installation options. Also, a fun side note, the maximums have been cranked up considerably since Server 2012. In fact, on the memory side, for a physical machine, it used to be 4 terabytes. Now, it's 24 terabytes, a 6 times increase. For a virtual machine, it was 1 terabyte. Now, it is 12 terabytes, a 12 times increase. And on the processor side, for a physical machine, we used to have 320 LPs, that's logical processors. Now, 512 LPs. And on the virtual side, it used to be around 75 virtual processors. Now, we're up to 240 VPs. So we can build some beefy servers here with Server 2016. Moving on, let's cover those 6 flavors of Windows Server. Again, the 2 most popular ones you're going to encounter out there in the wild are Data Center and Standard. Now, back in Server 2012, things were very simple when it came to choosing an edition. All features are the same across both Standard and Data Center. The only thing you had to worry about, the only real question you had to ask yourself, is how many VMs do I need to support? Data Center gave you unlimited VMs. Standard gave you access to 2 VMs. And so you would need to stack Standard licenses on a single server if you needed more than 2 VMs. Server 2016 has complicated things a little bit. Okay, a lot, because it's making people's heads spin. The first big change, and I feel like we're going back in time here, back to the Server 2008 and prior days, is that Data Center supports an advanced feature set. So you're going to need to take this into your decision-making process if you need some of those advanced features. Things like Storage Spaces Direct, Storage Replica, shielded virtual machines, and software-defined networking. And by the way, Storage Spaces Direct and Storage Replica are topics here for 70-740, which is why we're going to be running Data Center Edition in all of our virtual labs. The other big change is our licensing model. Microsoft has moved away from processor-based licensing in favor of core-based licensing. Now again, back in Server 2012, this was all very simple because 1 license would cover 2 physical CPUs. And if that was a standard edition license, that would also give us access to 2 VMs, or what we called virtual operating system environments. And by the way, there's no distinction between VOSEs, virtual operating system environments, and POSEs, physical operating system environments here in Server 2016. They're just OSEs. We get an unlimited number of OSEs with Data Center and still 2 here per license with Standard. But what this means then is if I needed 4 VMs, well, I would just buy another license. I would stack licenses here, and then I would have 2 licenses on this server for both of these CPUs, which would give me access to 4 VMs. So with Server 2016, it's much more granular. We need to license every single core in this server. And there's a minimum of 8 core licenses per physical CPU and a minimum of 16 core licenses per server. So what that means is if I have 16 or more cores in a machine and I need access to, say, 4 VMs on my standard edition box, I'm going to need to buy another round of licenses, another 16 or more core licenses to cover that machine. If you need 2 more VMs, you're going to need to buy another 16. So if you need 6 VMs, you're going to need at a minimum 48 core licenses. Now, what if I have less? What if I only have, say, 10 cores or 12 cores in a machine? Doesn't matter. Your minimum is 16, so you'll still need to license those machines as if they had 16 cores. So what this all boils down to is that it's more granular, and it's going to require a little more thought and planning on our part to ensure that we're properly licensed and we're choosing the right edition for our needs. Now, these other 4 editions are really meant for special use cases. Essentials Edition is meant for those single server shops. Small businesses, supports up to 25 users and 50 devices, and comes with 1 OSE, either physical or virtual. Multi-point premium server, available through academic licensing only, is really meant for classroom environments and allows multiple users to share a single machine. Storage Server is a brand new addition here in Server 2012 that is not available to the public. This is an OEM-only solution, and it's really designed for those storage manufacturers to include in their storage appliances and comes packed with all of those great storage features. And finally, we have Hyper-V Server, which is a free standalone headless hypervisor anybody can download and use and remotely manage. We also need to understand the kind of workload that our machines are going to support. Again, what is the purpose of this machine in our network? Is this going to be a single-purpose machine with one responsibility and one role dedicated to it? Which, by the way, is the trend these days. Really small operating system with one role dedicated to it. It makes it very lightweight, which makes it portable and much easier to recover from disaster. Or is this going to be a dual-purpose machine? Maybe it's both our web and database server in one. Or is this going to be a multi-purpose machine covering all of the roles and responsibilities packed onto it for everything in our network, which you'll see more common in small businesses. All of those paths will lead you down different resource requirements. Obviously, the more stuff we put onto a server, the more resources we're going to need to give it. Now, we're going to get into the many ways that we can install server roles, role services, and features. These are all built-in Windows components that we use to shape a server and to provide it with the features that it needs to run the workload. Server roles are primary functions of a machine, like a web server or a DHCP server or a DNS server. Role services are the components that make up a server role. And not all server roles have role services. They're generally associated with the bigger ones, and we can choose which features of that server role we want to include on our server. We also have features, and features are really just there to augment a server or to support an existing server role. Another big decision is physical or virtual. Now, obviously, the trend the past many years has been towards virtualizing everything, packing as many VMs onto a physical host as possible, especially with private and public clouds. But there are still some benefits to going physical, namely around performance and security. Although with the new shielded virtual machine option here in Server 2016, that is debatable. But aside from those two things, it's hard to ignore all the benefits we get from virtualization. Disaster recovery, high availability, scalability, portability, manageability are all much easier in a virtual environment than they are in a physical environment. The final piece of this puzzle is our installation option. Again, we have 3 of them. The desktop experience is our full graphical user interface. It's big, it's heavy, it's resource intensive, and it has a larger attack surface, but it's what we're comfortable with. So you'll see it more often than not out there in the wild. We also have Server Core, which is a much smaller attack surface, lightweight, but it's command line only, although we can still manage it remotely with our graphical user interface tools. And our brand new option here in Server 2016 is Nano Server. Incredibly small, just enough bits to run exactly what we need. It's completely headless. You will not log into this to perform any sort of management. We will do all of that remotely with tools like PowerShell. You'll be getting very familiar with all 3 of these installation options in the virtual lab as we roll through this course. In this CBT Nugget, we covered all of those major factors that you will need to consider when planning for a Windows Server 2016 deployment. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.